Hi, I'm Greg Hunter. This is the weekly news wrap-up for Friday, November 30th, 2012. I'm really only talking about two stories, but they're multifaceted. The U.S. Financial situation, fiscal cliff, that kind of stuff, and the Middle East. Let's start with the U.S. financial situation. The Democrats and Republicans are trying to strike a deal to avoid the fiscal cliff, the so-called fiscal cliff. That's where at the 1st of 2013, if they don't have a deal, there'll be mandatory spending cuts and mandatory tax increases. And they don't want that. They want to work out some kind of deal to spread it out over the next 10 years. So the Republicans, to their credit, have come up with $1 trillion worth of revenue. Not a lot of money over the 10 years, $100 billion a year, but they've come up with revenue, which is really confiscation. To try to strike a deal. And they're talking about things, not just Republicans, but Democrats and Republicans. They're talking about things like eliminating the mortgage interest deduction. Well, of course, realtors don't want that. They say that'll hurt housing. And that's the problem. A tax increase here will hurt somebody, so they don't want that. And a spending cut over here will hurt somebody, so they don't want that. And the Democrats, well, they haven't really come up with any substantial plan for any spending cuts. The Republicans say, hey, we'll give you your revenue. Well, we don't want to raise top rates, but you have to give us, some spending cuts. We want to cut social welfare programs. Now, I hate to include Social Security as a welfare program because, people pay into it and they expect a return. But there are plenty of other programs that are welfare programs, Medicaid, Medicare. And, hey, you know what? Neither party is talking about not mentioning a word about the ongoing banker bailouts. And we've spent trillions of dollars pumping these big banks up. And right now they're spending $40 billion each and every month buying toxic assets off the bank's books. And these assets, mortgage-backed securities, were supposed to be equal to treasuries. And they're toxic? Hey, isn't that fraudulent? Why isn't the FBI investigating? That's another story. At any rate, the Democrats and Republicans seem like they're spending more time trying to blame the other side and not get the blame because I don't think that they think they can reach a deal. And they're trying to get the other side to get the blame and not have their side get the blame. We need something. Because if there's not a deal, I predict that one of the rating companies, and maybe more than one, if there's not a substantial deal, not just a can kick down the road to get it, the new Congress, and past, the inauguration of President Obama's second term, his inauguration. If there's not a substantial deal, I think one of the rating companies cuts U.S. debt again. Oh, that could raise borrowing costs. It could spike interest rates. And then I had Ira Harris on, who is a legendary trader and a market caller, and he says, well, if they don't get a substantial deal, they don't get a real deal, the Federal Reserve is going to print money like crazy because they're not going to want the deflation of the budget cuts. They're not going to want that. So they're going to print money like crazy, and that's going to debase the currency, cause inflation to go up, and, of course, gold and silver will be going up right along with it. On top of that, the debt ceiling is going to be reached about the last week of 2012 at nearly $16.4 trillion. And hey, guess what? Add in New York and New Jersey, which are both about $600 billion in debt between them. They're both asking for nearly between them $80 billion. 79 billion, I think, to pay for Hurricane or Superstorm Sandy. The bottom line is we're not cutting. We take in a little more than a couple $1 trillion, and we're spending a little more extra, another $1 trillion on top of that, and that can't go on forever. It just can't. And so the real fiscal cliff is going to be a credit rating downgrade. And what happens if, we have a dollar calamity or people start not buying our debt or people start selling the U.S. Treasuries that are held outside the country, which are something like $12 trillion. Some people say that's the real fiscal cliff. The Middle East. We had a ceasefire that apparently is holding between Hamas in Gaza and the Israelis. It was a nasty little 8-day, blowout battle. Somebody had said on the site, how do you know that Hamas is being armed by Iran? Well, because Hamas's leaders have publicly been quoted as saying such, that they were saying that Iran has helped us and armed us, and we hope they'll continue to help us and rearm us, and that's Hamas is saying that. And the reason why I point this out is because a rearming and a ceasefire is not a peace deal and a ratcheting down of hostilities. I think it's only a matter of time before the Israelis and Hamas go at it again. On another note, the UN recognized Palestine. Now, they didn't really give them statehood, but they basically upgraded their status to a non-member observer state. It's a major upgrade in status. And the UN overwhelmingly voted for this. Only 9 votes against it. The U.S. and Israel were 2 of them. Susan Rice, the UN ambassador, says, hey, we voted against it because it's going to make a deal harder between the Palestinians and the Israelis. And that really, this is a kind of an end run, around a face-to-face talks with the 2 parties that are involved. It's going to make it harder. But boy, make no mistake, this was a major victory for Palestinians and a major black eye for the Israelis and in the United States, that's for sure. And the United States says this, our ambassador says this is going to make a deal much harder, and it's going to make things much more contentious. But it was a major victory for the Palestinians. There's no doubt about it. Next door in Egypt, remember Mohamed Morsi, he won an election. Well, I don't think the Egyptian people were thinking they were electing a dictator. But, Morsi came in and took over and took control and said, we don't need anybody else to have any powers. He took sweeping powers. Boy, that was a mistake. The Egyptians were back in Tahrir Square and back protesting and rioting in the tens of thousands, in some cases the hundreds of thousands, as many as 200,000 have been packed in Tahrir Square, protesting this power grab by President Morsi. And the people there, they want something like the United States has, separation of powers, executive branch, that's Morsi, a legislative branch, and a judicial branch. They don't want one guy having all that power, and do you blame them? I certainly don't. I hope Morsi backs off the dictator routine. That's for sure. And finally, Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett is backing CEO Jamie Dimon, CEO of J.P. Morgan Chase, as Treasury Secretary. This coming from a guy who basically, many of his companies in Berkshire Hathaway were bailed out. He wouldn't be such a legendary investor if it wasn't for the government bailouts. I mean, just a few of his companies that received government bailouts. A big investor, Warren Buffett is, into Wells Fargo. They got, government bailouts. General Electric, government bailouts. Goldman Sachs, more of the same. American Express, government bailouts. Remember his number 2, Charlie Munger, who said, well, you just have to, tough, just to take it. And now Warren Buffett wants Jamie Dimon to be the Treasury Secretary. I wrote a piece this week talking about fraud and negligence and incompetence in the financial sector. And I used as the poster child J.P. Morgan Chase, who Jamie Dimon is the CEO of J.P. Morgan Chase. And just 3 of the examples in the last year alone. They just recently paid nearly $300 million to settle SEC fraud charges for mortgage-backed securities that, they were supposed to be equal to a Treasury. And, hey, they turned out to be toxic. Remember, the Federal Reserve is buying $40 billion a month of those assets and removing them from banks' books to the banks' books, the big banks anyway, to prop them up. And then we had the whole LIBOR rate rigging scandal. That's the London bank offered rate. Hundreds of trillions of dollars of interest rates are set off that rate, off LIBOR. And J.P. Morgan Chase is one of about a dozen banks that are alleged to be in the middle of a rate rigging scandal that some have said and called the biggest financial crime in history. The reports are $800 trillion in interest rates are set off LIBOR. And then remember Jamie Dimon and the $2 billion London whale debacle where, they were trading in risky assets, and he went to his shareholders and said, well, it's $2 billion. And 3 or 4 months later, it ends up being more than $6 billion. He missed it by $4 billion. And apparently he didn't know that they were doing these risky trades or didn't know that they were losing this kind of money before he made this announcement. That's the way it looked to me. And this is the guy, Warren Buffett, Mr. I love government bailouts, once running the Treasury Department. I don't get it. I sure don't. That's the way I see it. I'm Greg Hunter. Thank you for joining me, and thank you for supporting USAWatchdog.com.